Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another thing where I talk about things. Today, we're going to talk about the Skellingrim campaign. We're actually getting close to the end of the Skellingrim campaign, as you might imagine, because after all, we wrapped everything up. We got our characters. Thelos got to become a man, just like she always wanted, and so on and so forth. But anyway, at the end of this whole campaign, we had the group with Skellingrim. They delivered the anklet. Skellingrim had a spear. And like I explained, the spear was actually going to be drawing the primordial stuff the universe was made out of. And he was going to use that as a weapon to defeat Lord Archaeopteryx. And then he was going to supplant himself as the leader of the undead. So I gave the group a choice. And I said, do you want to join the undead? Like you'll become skeletons, Skellingmans, and you'll be like undead enforcers or whatever like that. You'll become lieutenants under Skellingrim because you worked well with him before and you guys have achieved a lot in a very short amount of time. Or do you want to stick with the living and work things out? And what wound up happening was the group kind of debated about this, and they were really intrigued by the idea of working with Skellingrim because it wasn't even going to be like an evil campaign. I'd done enough to sort of paint the undead with Skellingrim in a light that they were, you know, hey, maybe people over here, that the group wasn't really, like, they're kind of looking at it and they were like, well, it's not exactly like it's going to be an evil campaign. It's going to be more like a misunderstood campaign. Like, everyone, we're like the undead, we're like skeletons, and everyone thinks that we're evil, but we're actually a bunch of nice guys just trying to do right by the world. But what they did, I think, is they determined that some of the characters that we're playing, like Lyman Yates, the halfling, wouldn't be able to reconcile being part of the undead. He wasn't going to be able to get along with it. So they said, so after some debate, and we had we ended the session when he requested this, when he says like, what do you want to do? They took a week to think about it, and then they got back to me, and they were like, I think we're going to stay mortal. And so Skellingrim shook their hands, and he said, well, it was really good working with you, you know, I hope for the best, but fair warning, there's probably going to be some clash between the mortals and the dead. So steer clear of that, you know, try to stay on this side of the battle, and then you guys won't get mixed up on it. So the party kind of looked around and they were like, oh, that was probably our signal that we should get mixed up in this stuff. You know, this is game logic, of course. Like Skellingrim was just trying to get it, like just stay on this side of the world. You know, it'll take a while for us to get all this way west. But the group was just like, oh, okay, we should probably go tell someone. But they weren't entirely sure what to do. So they decided to go ahead and go back to the Blue Wizard. Insomuch, shoot, I forget his name. Count Kalaris. They decided to go back to Count Kalaris and talk to him because they were like, well, Count Kalaris can read our minds. So if nothing else, I mean, he can verify that what we said is true and that our intentions are pure and noble, and maybe he can make a choice based on what we tell him. So they went back to Count Kalaris and got arrested again and talked things over with him. Like he locked them in the prison. And they explained that, you know, they were trying to get rid of the amulet and everything else like that. And Kalaris was like, yes, well, I know that. I read your mind. Like, I tried to stop you because, you know, I'm pretty sure that when the undead are doing something, anything, it's probably, like, not for the better of humanity or the mortal world. So it would have been really much better if I had gotten a hold of that anklet. We would have thought of something to do, like maybe destroy it. I don't know. But the party, I can't remember how this exactly worked out, because there was some kind of logic behind it. I think the idea was that they were still in the good graces of Skellingrim, and because of the sending spell, they could still contact him if they wanted, because with the sending spell, anybody who you met once, you can just send a message to. And this created kind of an interesting opportunity, because the group knew Skellingrim and were on good terms with him, and so in a way that was kind of useful because they could just magically contact him at any time and just basically tweet things at him and just be like, hey Skellingrim, you know, want some beer and pizza, like having a game night tonight, come over. And Skellingrim may or may not show up. So with this in mind, Count Kalaris decided that he would call together some of the other wizards that he was on friendly terms with, and they would prepare for the resurgence of the undead, because this is what they were promised was going to happen, and picking the party's mind confirmed that that was the case. So he gathered up the party and he took them to a teleportation circle and teleported them away to meet two of the other wizards. There was a red wizard and a white wizard, and they specialized kind of in magic of the flesh and magic of war. which is like evocation and not exactly abjuration. It was kind of more like a necromancy wizard, I suppose, what the white wizard was. But, you know, they didn't do necromancy anymore. They didn't exactly call it necromancy. He just knew how to do things like he could make clones and things like that, and he knew quite a lot about, you know, magic of the flesh. This is what necromancy really is. But, yes. The other two wizards they weren't super keen on trusting the party because, like, Count Kalaris kind of showed up, and Count Kalaris, he was a little bit weird in the first place, and he also came from, like, a notoriously weird family, but, you know, he was, like, strong. They had a strong navy because, like, his domain was on the shore, and they did a lot of river combat, and they had all kinds of aces up their sleeve, so it was kind of like they played along with Count Kalaris, whether they liked it or not. And Count Kalaris was like, yes, so, you know, these are some friends of mine, and I feel like we should all cooperate with them, and you know, maybe we could put them to good use. And so, Richard Dalton, the Red Wizard, he didn't really want much to do with them. He mostly wanted to focus on dealing with the undead. But the White Wizard said, well, you know, okay, I've got some stuff that I could have them do. I mean, like, this is all kind of relevant, so if you insist, Count Kalaris, then I can come up with something for them to handle. So he took them away to the Dwarven lands, back up to the mountains in the north, where the party had been kind of vaguely. The Dwarven lands were just to the west of the Dragonlands, and that's like the mountains. The mountains are what caused the desert to appear on the other side of the mountains. So yeah, so the dwarf, he was like, all right, so I've got a thing I want you to do. The mines of Deepfjord. Apparently, like, there's supposed to be a huge resource of, the primordial stuff down there, and because you are already aware of this, and you kind of know what you're looking at, and you've dealt with it in the past, I want you to go down there and have a look at it. And the party said, we don't have no money. They said, we don't have no money, White Wizard, and I can't remember, shoot. Steel Eye, I think is what his name was? Steel Eye, something like that, Steel Tooth. Something silly, some kind of dwarf name. The White Wizard, he just goes, oh, you don't have any money. He goes, well, I can't give you money, I'm a dwarf. You know, it's against my religion. But I could pay you for a job, I suppose. The other thing that we have that's going on is there's some bandits up in the mountains, and, you know, granted that we're trying to mobilize to deal with, like, a real military threat, I can't spare a lot of soldiers all of a sudden. So if you go and you deal with these bandits, which, as it turns out, are a bunch of defected guards in the first place, then yeah, I'll let you keep their supplies and their money and whatever they've pilfered, and we'll call it square. So the group said, okay, you know, that sounds fair. We'll kill the bandits, and we get to keep their supplies. And they're like, yeah, and if you bring back their guard materials, we'll pay you for whatever their, you know, their armor and equipment. So, you know, like, normal merchants won't buy, like, equipment that was clearly stolen off the corpse of a guard, but we'll pay you because we know where you got it from. So the party said, all right, that sounds great. So the party all got together, and they went up to the north of the mountains, and this was about where I think the party was level 6 at this point, and that's another really big milestone in D&D. Like I said, D&D is a little bit frustrating to GM if you haven't played through, like, every single level. And like, I've played D&D before, but I've never played into, like I think the highest level I've ever got in the past was, like, maybe, like, level 3, level 4, something like that. And, you know, it's because I never really stuck out very many D&D games. It's one of my less favorite systems. And D&D has milestones, though. Like, every so many levels, you get, like, oh, this player gets buried alive and all these kinds of upgrades. And I've talked about this before. So, level 6, I prepared, like, these dwarves. And there were, like, 30 of these dwarves out in the mountain. Like, a whole battalion of guard that had just, like, defected and were now pillaging the countryside. And, like, nobody could stop them. And I set up I actually gave him a really defensible position. I had the party went up there, and they actually found one of the guards while he was, like, scoping the place out, and they snuck up on him. They were like, hey, like, we're looking for a bunch of defected guards. Have you seen him? And the guard, being a guard, he was like, oh, no, I'm one of the guards that didn't turn bad. I'm out here looking for him. You know, I haven't seen him or anything. And then they're like, oh, okay, all right, tell us if you see anything. Like, do you mind if we camp out here? And the guard's like, oh, no, I don't mind. You know, it's fine, just doing my guard things. Are you gonna leave in the morning? And they were like, yeah, we'll leave in the morning. He's like, okay, all right, yeah, you can stay with me. You'll guard over here. And he didn't, like, try anything because it was just, like, the one guard, and there was, like, all these guys. But eventually they left. They went up to the town, and they were like, yeah, like, where are they located? And so some of the townspeople kind of knew where they were, so they directed them back. They sent them back the way they came, and they're like, oh yeah, back where you spotted that guard earlier. So the party went up there, and I actually had the, like, I don't often like to do this because, like, D&D, again, it's also frustrating because D&D, they measure everything by, like, every single spell travels, like, so many feet, and, like, you know, different things happen at different feet, and it says, like, oh, this spell explodes at this, you know, much radius or whatever, and it's very difficult to kind of figure in your head, like, you can't just say, like, oh, you know, roughly it's about this far. So, like, I had done my best to kind of work with impromptu grids, and a lot of GMs you'll find kind of do this because building a dungeon by hand for every single game is quite like, it's very frustrating. But I'd actually sat down and I designed out this little area, this thing that these dwarves had, and what they were doing is they'd set up these kind of like these wooden palisades, which are like tall sort of tree trunks. You know, they'd chop down some trees and they'd set them up and they'd file them down and they'd kind of set up a barricade, and then they'd set up like a rock trap, like a rock slide trap, so that if anybody tried to come in and get them, they could pull the rock slide trap and bury those people alive. And so there were like 30 dwarves, and like I said, I had a plan and I knew exactly what I was doing, but I was stunned like how quickly 30 like level 3 dwarves were routed by like 10 level 6 characters. And again, it comes back to like level 3, you attack once, you know, you don't get all kinds of fancy abilities. Like level 6, everybody's attacking twice, everybody's getting like a ton more dice to roll. Like there's just this exponential leap in power, you like double power. And yeah, I don't know if you guys can hear the squeaking. It's Claudia's dog. So yes. But anyway, though, so yes, there's just this like exponential leap in power, and so these poor dwarves, even with the tactical advantage of having their own fortress, and like they had dark sight, like the party comes running right at them, and like they hadn't like scouted out the area before, so they didn't find the rock traps or anything like that. So the party comes running right at them. The dwarves like pull the rock trap. The party mostly makes their saves on it, and like I think a couple of people took damage. The paladin had summoned a spectral horse, and the spectral horse got buried in like rocks. The spectral horse died. The spectral horse completely failed its save. So I think a couple of people got banged up, but then like there was a cleric in the party, so they just healed everyone, and it was like fine. And so the dwarves, they had crossbows, and so what they did is they would fire the crossbows and then move backwards, or vice versa, whatever the way that goes. So they just fire the crossbows and move backwards. And if somebody got too close, they would make a full sprint retreat, and they were kind of leapfrogging back and forth. And so the party just chased them on until they got into the caves. And dwarves have like dark sight, and so there were like 10 dwarves outside that were doing this leapfrogging thing, and a couple of the dwarves died, you know, just due to ranged combat at the end of, you know, the party throwing fireballs. And, you know, that made sense. So the party just runs in, you know, completely not even heeding the danger, and they charge right into the middle of the caves, and the cave actually broke off into like 3 prongs, and there were like 10 dwarves on one side and 10 dwarves on the other side, and the survivors from the first 10 dwarves that were outside just ran straight down the middle. So the party just chased them straight down the middle, and then got pincer attacked by the dwarves on either side. And I thought to myself, like, oh, you know, like, well, they just ran in without even thinking about, like, this being a feint. You know, the dwarves had planned this from the very start. They knew that they were going to be attacked by the military, and so they had planned to actually fight like a military. They, you know, this was only 10 guys, but they knew they were going to be attacked, and they planned to hold out. There was even, like, a river, like a river that ran through this cave. Like, this place was so perfect. They had rafts in the back, so if things went very badly, the plan was that they were going to run for the river and then get on the rafts and then get away on the river. So everything was planned out for these dwarves. They knew exactly what they were doing. But the level difference is so huge between, like, 3 and 6. It's like, I figured, you know, there's 3 times as many dwarves, so, like, there should be... Like with all these tactical advantages, I was thinking that surely, even though the dwarves only attack half as often, that the fact that there's 3 times as many dwarves should make a big difference. But in D&D, that is not the case. In D&D, the level 6 is like 5 times better than level 3, so it may as well have been like 100 men attacking 30 men as far as the game was concerned. It's just silly. So yeah, the dwarves were just complete, like, the floor was just absolutely mopped. Like, They couldn't even run because the party had abilities, like I think like Sentinel or things like that. They had feats that prevented enemies from like moving outside their sphere of influence without provoking attacks of opportunity, or to a more extreme degree than what you normally got. Like, it was so bad. The dwarves were like trying to make tactical retreats, and the party was just like, I rolled to slaughter the dwarves. So it was just a total rout. Like, dwarves stood no chance whatsoever. I felt bad for him. I also felt bad for myself for wasting all the time setting up this whole scenario and then just like having it be like the party was completely justified just making a straight like run at the dwarves like it didn't matter. So yeah, absolutely trashed. You know, poor dwarves. So the party went back to Steel Eye, Sable Eye, Silver Eye, probably. I think Silver Eye was what it was. They went back to Silver Eye, and we're like, here's all this stuff, here's everything. So Silver Eye gave them a bunch of money, and they used it to stock up on supplies and get some new armor, get some new weapons and things like that. And again, I gotta point out, like, you know, normally by level 6, players have enough gold that they're at, like, the best armor in the game or whatever. But I'd given the party, like, no gold throughout all that. So, you know, the party was all dealing with, like, the equipment that they'd acquired at level 1. Like, they hadn't gotten better equipment, really, at all throughout the game. So, yeah, just, you know, those level differences, D&D. Like, if you don't know that system like the back of your hand, like, the scaling in power will not make any intuitive sense. So, yeah. But anyway, so Silver Eye, he's like, all right, so that's done. So now you guys are ready to go down to the mine of Deepfjord. And so the party says, yeah, sure, mine of Deepfjord. All right, we're ready for that, no problem. So they all pack up their things and they go down south to the mine of Deepfjord to find the resting place of the last Black Wizard. And they find that, you know, they go back to the door, and one of the things that had happened was that Skellingrim had broken the seal and gone in and had a look around the place. And so the group gets there, and like they were given a key to break the seal. They're like, yeah, it would take incredibly strong magic to break the seal normally. So here's a key to break it. And so they were just like, oh yeah, sure. And they like didn't tell Sable Eye that the seal was already broken. So he just gave them this magical like stone to unseal the door, like not knowing that they didn't need it. But they were just like, yeah, sure, yeah, magical artifact, we'll take that. And so they just like they took it and they went down there and they were like, so I mean, like I guess the door's already open. And so they just kind of go right in. We've still got time. So yeah, so the party goes into the mine of Deepfjord, and it turns out that what was in there was actually there was the primordial stuff. The dwarves had dug deep down, they delved too deep and too greedily, and they'd hit primordial stuff rather than balrogs. I always really like the idea of dwarves hitting things too deep, too greedily. Like, it cracks me up. Like, I remember I used to play with RPG Maker, and as a consistent theme in virtually every game, I like to include dwarves and have them dig too deep and too greedily, and always running into monsters, or more often, like, lava, which the dwarves refuse to interpret as like, a danger, or like I guess magma in this case because it was below ground, but like the dwarves like would interpret it as a fire demon, like, oh, it's a massive gelatinous fire demon is what that is, like down there, it's if ever I seen one. So the dwarves were just like they'd hit magma and just be like, oh wow, like we've delved too deep and too greedily and hit a terrible monster. And so after that, it was all about trying to figure out how to get past the monster. Because clearly the magma was guarding a great treasure. Otherwise, nobody would have sealed the magma down there deep in the earth. And in my head, I like to think that every dwarf has a really weird, sick disease that causes them to want to dig into the core of the earth and die. Like they don't know why they want to do this, but they're just born like that. And they just have to dig as deep as they can until they've dug too deep and too greedily. So the dwarves, they dug too deep and too greedily, and they uncovered the primordial stuff the universe was made from. And they put it in barrels, and they brought it up, like upstairs, and they put it into places. And so over time, the primordial stuff had taken life of its own and wiped out all the inhabitants, and was now just kind of roaming the place as bizarre monstrosities, weird bug-type things, arms hanging down from the ceilings, just kind of another weird little world, which the party traipsed around and didn't run into very much of particular value to them, mostly just threatening things. In the room full of like large arms hanging down from the ceiling, That was actually an old storeroom, and what the arms were doing is they were reaching down, grabbing things, and then moving them to other places, then reaching down, grabbing, and moving them to other places again. They were sort of mimicking what the dwarves had done, where they used to stockpile things in the storerooms, and the arms were continuing to stockpile things, it's just they had no more things to recognize. If the party had gone into that room, then the arms would have tried to stockpile them and prevent them from leaving. They would have had to like do something about the arms, which would have continually just picked them up and tried to keep them in there for forever. But the party took a look at that. They look at that and they were like, yeah, there's like, I was like, yeah, there's like valuable stuff in here. Like there's some gemstones that are still good and like, you know, a bunch of like raw materials and things like that. And the party was just like, nope, not doing that. Not going, not gonna do that adventure. So they just closed the door and were like, yep, moving along. They found like a garden, sort of an upstairs area where a bunch of like plants that didn't need sunlight were being grown, and there was like a giant centipede in there that attacked them. It fell down from the ceiling on top of them and tried to eat them all. They fought that thing off. They also found like a large sort of giant made out of dwarves. It was like an amalgamation of dwarves, like weird sort of oily looking, you know, like blackish kind of dwarven like faces and things like that smashed up into a creature. And yeah, but what was most important, though, was eventually the party came down to the throne room, where they found an old corpse sitting on the throne. And it turned out that this old corpse was none other than Josiah, the top assassin who worked for Lord Archaeopteryx during the war. And so they came in, and there was another skeleton there. It was like an old wizard in a black robe. And Josiah had killed the last wizard, and then sat down on the throne in triumph, and it turned out that the black wizard that he'd killed had cursed the throne as a trap to Josiah. It was one of those things like Josiah came in to fight with the guy, and this was after the dwarves had been wiped out in the general area, and so he says, you know, you've come to take your throne, and you'll never sit on a real throne, Josiah. And so Josiah killed him, and then deciding, you know, well, I'll just rub it in the face of his death, he sat down on the throne and then just got stuck, his butt got magically glued to it for the rest of eternity. So he's just sitting around there, this like ridiculously lethal, like magical entity with like nothing to do but kind of wait for somebody to come by or just to scheme and think about what he would do if he ever got off of this terrible throne that he was stuck on. You know, being undead, he was immortal, he was never really going to decay. So the creatures generally left him alone because he was dangerous and vindictive, but the party didn't know he was down there. So the party stumbles on down, and Josiah had a bunch of like mind-altering spells and things like that, but he didn't use them right off. At first he tried to talk them into helping him get out of the chair, and he was just like, yeah, no, if you help me get out of the chair, oh, this is important, right. After the party went into the room, the door upstairs closed, and part of that was that Josiah had been figuring out how to project his magic around the place a little bit better. He was trying to escape as well as he could. He'd managed to tap into the seals on the door. It was one of the few things that he was able to do. So he was able to find the magic, and then from his position all the way down on this chair, he was able to tap into that seal, and so he could seal the door at any time. Like he could seal himself in. He couldn't leave, but he could definitely seal himself in, and he was trying to figure out how to get up. But yeah, it was too well designed of a trap. Another thing he'd managed to do is he'd figured out how to cast a bunch of spells without components, because otherwise he would have been like a sitting duck, like more sitting duck than he actually was. Originally, he wasn't supposed to be able to really cast spells like that when the party found him, but that was back when they were level whatever, and now that they were like level 6, he was, you know, he would have been a little too helpless without any ability to cast spells. So, yes, he could cast spells without components. And so he was like, help me out of the chair, and I'll help you out of the place. Like, I don't know why the door's locked, but you know, I'm a good guy. Like, you can trust me. Like, surely you've seen that, you know, not every member of the undead is an unscrupulous bastard. And so the party like talked about it for a little while, and they were like, yeah, I mean, like, I would believe that for some undead, but like, isn't Josiah kind of like the top like assassin for like, didn't he like kill people, like, because they took their history rolls and somebody remembered, like somebody got a really good roll and they were like, oh yeah, Josiah. They were like, yeah, he was like feared across the land, like if Josiah was coming for you, it was surely death. And everyone was terrified of Josiah. Like he was just you know, the Grim Reaper, he came and he stabbed you and you were gone. So the party was like, gee, yeah, boy, that sounds like something that should stay stuck in this chair, doesn't it? So they decided that they were going to try and avoid Josiah. But what he wound up doing was there's a spell called Dream. And I had to nerf this because, again, like I say, like, people are like, oh, Greg, I can't believe that you didn't, like, think ahead and know about every single spell in the D&D handbook. And I looked it up. There's like 400 spells in the D&D book. It is absurd. And one of them is this spell called Dream. And what Dream is a way to kill any character in the game as soon as you've, like, gained the ability to cast it. Especially if you're, like, say, a warlock, which, as it turned out, Josiah was. Because warlocks get their spells back if they rest for an hour. So Josiah used this spell called Dream to make it to where every time Lyman Yates fell asleep, Josiah attacked him with a terrible nightmare, which hurt him in the worst case, and otherwise just kind of woke him up and disrupted his sleep. And if Josiah kept doing this, you can actually kill characters with exhaustion. And everyone was actually really concerned because they were like, oh, well, if Josiah is, like, really vindictive, come to think, he actually could kill everyone in the party with this Dream spell. Because there was, like, no range on it. You know, you could just cast it. And it was one of those things, I think they talked about, like, a player character had broken the game once. Because they'd, like, met the big bad. Some GMs do that. They're like, the big bad appears, and he's like, hello! And then he, like, you know, knocks the party down. He's like, oh, now that you've tasted my power, I will leave. And so the party member got back up, and they're like, I'll show that dickhole. I'll just cast Dream until he's dead. So that's what they did, is they actually killed in another campaign that they played in. Like, they were discussing that. They were like, yeah, we used the Dream spell to, like, kill a big bad once. Like, one of the level 20 whatevers the GM was supposed to be intimidating us with. Like, he got to where he just couldn't sleep anymore, and then he died from exhaustion. Like, there's things you can do. I think, like, you can set up magical wards, but there has to be a little bit of GM fiat if you're, you know, like I say, like D&D, to be like, oh, how could you not predict what everyone's going to do? Like, it's bad enough if you haven't played all the way to level 20 in the past, but I mean, like, with so many spells and so many different powers, like, every class gets some stupid quirk at, like, various levels. It's kind of a fool's errand to try and predict everything the party might possibly do. So in this case, though, the party had no plan for, like, oh shit, Josiah can cast Dream. And so during that session, I assured them, I said, when you get out of here, Josiah will no longer be able to cast Dream on you. I will not gradually kill you all one by one with an angry NPC. Don't worry. Like, make your decision based on the assumption that Dream will not follow you forever. So they were like, okay, all right, yes. In that case, we'll try to continue to resist Josiah and figure out how to get out of here by another means. So, yes. Okay, now looks like a good time to stop. You know, it is a good time to stop because the party kind of had to make a plan from here, and it gets a little silly and kind of amusing. But anyway, that'll be it. So thanks for joining me, everybody. I will catch you all next time.